Wuthering Waves just delivered another big chapter. After 3.1, I wasn't sure when they were gonna top that, and sure enough, it didn't take long. 3.3 was nothing short of an amazing addition to the story, but more importantly, it proved that it wasn't just a fluke. Wuthering Waves is getting better with its storytelling, and it really feels like it's only going up from here. After this update, I honestly don't have much doubt about that. Because, looking at everything here, aside from a few nitpicks, it was masterfully delivered. Whether it's the structure or the emotional payoff, there's just not much to criticize. Of course, Aemeath and the protagonist are the stars of the show, or at least they were supposed to be. Something very interesting happens here, and we'll get to that. Before that though, I want to start with something that's been a bit unclear in Wuthering Waves up until now, despite being very important to any story, and that is Wuthering Waves' identity as a story was always pretty unclear, and there are several reasons for that, one of them being the self-insert protagonist. When the core character of your story is closer to cardboard than an actual person, it's kind of hard to tell where the story is gonna go, since characters are supposed to shape the tone and the identity of the story. In this case, it didn't really work. At that point, the identity of the story is left to the writers, the developers, or whoever has more sway in where the game is gonna go. And that's not really a good thing, because the direction of the story can shift based on what the developers want, rather than where the story is naturally supposed to go. Now obviously there are other reasons for this unclear identity. The usual segmented gacha storytelling didn't really help. When you have so many stories told on so many fronts, main story, character stories, side stories, it becomes very hard to form a clear picture. Kuro's other game, Punishing Grey Raven, also played a part in this. We didn't really know if they were gonna take a similar approach or if they were gonna give Wuthering Waves its own identity. Where is this story gonna go? How dark is it gonna get? Is it gonna lean more into tragedy or something more hopeful? All of that was unclear up until now. However, to my delight, and I'm sure to some people's disappointment, 3.3 establishes the identity of Wuthering Waves pretty clearly, and it does so in a strong contrast to Punishing Grey Raven. Personally, I think this is a good thing. Giving Wuthering Waves its own identity without leaning too hard into what people expect or what their previous game did was the right move. It needed that separation. Ever since 3.1, we kind of knew this was coming. The way they handled the outcome of Aemeath's story was always going to be the deciding factor for what kind of story they wanted to tell. And now we know. We're looking at a story where tragic endings are probably not going to be the norm. The good guys are, more often than not, going to win in the end. And despite what a lot of people think, that's not about the story being good or bad, it's just about the kind of story they want to tell. It doesn't diminish the emotional arcs of the characters or the trials they go through to reach those outcomes. I know a lot of people would disagree with that, but personally, this is the kind of story I would pick any day over something like Punishing Grey Raven. And speaking of characters, one thing they did very well was integrating the whole cast of La Hyrule into this chapter. From the NPCs to the playable characters who don't usually get much screen time outside of their own episodes, everything was, for the most part, integrated pretty naturally into the story without feeling forced. Sigrika herself played quite a big role in the outcome of the story. Linnea, even though her role in the outcome wasn't anything special, we got to see more of her character, especially when she talks about wanting a normal school life, while instead she's dealing with a world-ending catastrophe. I think that was a nice addition to her character, even if it wasn't much. On the other hand, Chisa, I'm not really sure what to say here. It's a bit confusing. I don't know if she's just a character who was introduced without much thought about what comes next, or if they're setting something up for her in future chapters. We don't really know yet, but even when she's on screen it feels like she doesn't have much presence. And I saw some of you mention in the community post that maybe that's just her personality, that she's a more reserved, keeps to herself, doesn't really talk much kind of person. And sure, that does make sense, but even then it would have been nice to have at least a small moment, maybe pulling the protagonist aside, having a few lines of dialogue, something that gives her a bit more weight in the story. Other than that though, the entire cast felt well used. Every character has some kind of role to play and it all feels natural. Even the smaller moments contribute to the overall outcome, no matter how minor they might seem. And considering that one of the common complaints is that the story feels too centered around the protagonist, I think this chapter does a lot to address that. Personally, I didn't really see it as a major issue before, but if this chapter proves anything, is that every character can matter, even the NPCs. But of course, we can't talk about the characters without mentioning the two new amazing additions to the roster of playable characters. Hiyuki was a pleasant surprise to say the least. For the most part, her story is pretty much what I expected. She's placed in the savior archetype, having to carry the burden of strength, of being the one who needs to protect others, that power she inherited from her predecessor, the same power that killed them, and the more she uses it, the closer it brings her to the same fate. At the core of her character is that burden of responsibility. And what makes it interesting is that she's not just accepting it, she's choosing it willingly. At the same time, she wants to put an end to it, so she doesn't have to pass that burden on to someone else. Up until this point, while she's a well-written character and her story is emotional, there's nothing that really stands out. But it's the way they chose to humanize her that elevates her from a good character to an amazing one. To Hiyuki, Rover is the perfect savior. Unlike her, they always manage to save the people they try to protect, and that view creates something really interesting. It creates envy towards the protagonist, but also frustration towards herself, because she can't achieve the same thing, she can't be the kind of savior Rover is. And it's that conversation she has with Rover that really solidifies her entire character arc. Not just for her, but for the protagonist as well. That single conversation does so much work for both of them, and the crazy part is how simple it is, but it works. Don't get me wrong, Hiyuki's story is far from over, and honestly I can't wait to see where her character goes next, especially after that shift in how she understands what a savior really is. But while the characters are getting stronger, there's still one part of the story that hasn't fully caught up. One thing I've always criticized in Wuthering Waves was the antagonist, so I'm pleasantly surprised to see more development on this side as well. We get to see more of their personalities, their goals, their ideals, beyond just being the shadowy organization with some mysterious objective. That's a good thing. At the same time though, I'm also a bit disappointed, because one thing Wuthering Waves still needs, and I've said this before, is a shift in the dynamic with the antagonist. At the end of the day, we still end up in the same place as before. Their plan moves forward mostly uninterrupted. And while it's a good thing that the game has now clearly established its identity, I think this also shows that they have a very specific direction in mind for their antagonists, which unfortunately might mean we're not going to see a major shift here anytime soon, if at all. And I think this is the part of the story that could hold it back in the long run. Even if everything else keeps improving, if this side doesn't evolve, it risks becoming that one element that limits the story. And this ties directly into Denia. I'm not going to go too deep into her character yet. I'd rather wait and see how they handle her in the second half of 3.3, but I'll admit, I was a bit disappointed that her story ended up being the most obvious one. There were a lot of theories about where her character could go, and in the end, it followed the most straightforward path. That doesn't make it bad, and I'm sure they're going to do a great job developing her further, but personally, I was hoping for something more. My own idea was that she would be the one to introduce that shift in the dynamic between the protagonist and the antagonist. Someone positioned as a pawn, a character who gets treated like a piece to be discarded, only to turn that around and outplay everyone. That would have been such an interesting direction. It's a bit unfortunate that it didn't go that way. Still, there's clearly more to come with her. So for now, we wait and see. But even with that, this chapter still delivers where it matters most. Of course, we can't end this without talking about the stars of the show, Aemeath and Rover. This was the moment everybody's been waiting for. We all wanted to save Aemeath. And while the outcome wasn't really a surprise, as the story was clearly building towards this, what I found interesting is that this moment didn't feel like the peak of the episode. And that was surprising, in a good way. There was just so much happening that, even though this moment was important, it didn't take away from everything else. In fact, the moment right before it, the moment before Aemeath and Rover finally reunite, was even more touching. When everyone who lost their lives to the Void Matter comes together to create the coordinates so Rover can find Aemeath, it was just so emotional, and it does so much for the story. Because we always knew we were going to save her. So if that moment wasn't written well, it might not have had the same impact. But by anchoring the emotional core of the scene to everything else, to all these people, all these sacrifices, it just works. Aemeath herself stays completely true to her character, even when those lost in the void matter try to sacrifice what little they have left. You can feel her emotions when she tries to stop them. It just shows how much she's grown. She becomes the kind of person she always aspired to be, someone who cares for others, someone who wants to save them, even at the cost of her own life. And Rover is just as important here. Looking back at where they started is kind of crazy. They become my favorite part of the story, and that's something you don't really see in gacha games. Everything that started in 3.1 and where they are now, it's such a huge evolution that they finally become what they were always supposed to be. They carry the story, and I can say this now with full confidence. This is who the protagonist is. I saw someone mentioning in the community post that when we first failed to save Aemeath, it didn't feel impactful enough because Rover didn't seem affected. And honestly, I thought the same at first, but looking at it now, I think we're in a completely different place. Rover isn't a cardboard character anymore. They are defined. It's not that they don't feel those emotions, it's that they process them differently. They're more internal. And realizing that, it just makes this whole journey feel so much better, because now we understand who they are. But more than anything, I think this chapter establishes one very important idea. Rover is not someone who can save the day alone, and I think that's the message the story was trying to convey. I can't really put it better than Aemeath herself. This wasn't a story about heroes saving the world, it was the world saving its heroes. And that line says everything. Yes, this is a happy ending, but it's not a happy ending because one person was strong enough to fix everything. It's a happy ending because everyone came together, because every single person mattered, because it couldn't have happened without all of them, and Rover couldn't have done it alone. That's what makes it feel earned. Coming out of this, I feel like we finally understand what kind of story Wuthering Waves is trying to tell. It's not a story defined by its outcomes, it's a story defined by the journey and by how that journey shapes its characters. And if this is the direction it's going in, then this is going to be a beautiful story. I think that's the most important takeaway from this chapter. It's not just that Wuthering Waves delivered a strong payoff, it's that it finally feels like the story knows exactly what it wants to be. When I look at everything we talked about, the identity, the characters, the way this whole moment was handled, it all points in the same direction. This isn't a story built around shock or tragedy, it's a story built around the journey and the people going through it. And now that that's clear, a lot of the conversation around it starts to change. It's no longer about what the story could be, it's about understanding what it already is. And interestingly enough, this ties back to something I talked about before. When we were discussing whether Wuthering Waves should go in a darker direction, the real question wasn't about adding more. It was about whether that direction even fits the story in the first place. And after 3.3, I think we finally have our answer. Still, if you want to hear more of that discussion, you can check it out right here. That's all for me for this one. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.